Jeff, good to see you. Thanks for joining me on the podcast. It's been a minute,
Yeah.
so thanks again.
Hey, I listen. Always a great pleasure to talk to you, John. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, last year we did an episode on MH370. There's been some new developments, which I know you are here to help share, and I think have a great conversation about it. It's still mind-boggling to me that in 2025, as we approach in 2026, the fact that an airliner disappeared basically off the face of the earth with hundreds of people on it, and we can't seem to solve this mystery. But you've done a lot of research into it and have some theories, and I do find them fascinating. So again, I look forward to kind of diving in and get some updates for today.
Yeah, it is kind of an interesting time again. Everything had gone very quiet on MH370 front for a long time. The plane vanished in 2014. There was a search on the seabed that the officials, the Australian government, basically paid for a Dutch company to search the seabed. They didn't find anything. We assumed that was it. They looked where the calculations of these weird signals said was supposed to be. Then this private company called Ocean Infinity stepped forward and, like, with a very unusual offer, said to the Malaysian government, "We will look for this for free, and you only have to pay us if we find it." And they searched an area that was as big as the original search area. Again, didn't find it, stopped. And, like, really, I think it was reasonable to think. Basically, the way the Malaysians left it was, we will look again if there is significant new information.
Okay.
And there just wasn't. I mean, there was no new. There was actually something. There was a lot of media attention on this guy who's kind of a hoaxer, who's presented himself as a aeronautical expert, but, like, really isn't. He came up with this theory that got a ton of media. Like, the media doesn't have the subject matter expertise to really judge this for themselves. So if somebody who sort of presents himself as being a credible source says, "Oh, I have this new method for determining where the plane went," they really believed it. I mean, even the Australian government, like, sort of put out a statement saying, "No, this guy is a credible source," which is very disappointing, because one of the reasons this is still a mystery is that we live in a time of, like, misinformation. And you hear about the bot networks that are always pumping out, false claims on Twitter or what have you. But there's a lot of people who are nominal authorities who are actually kind of operating in bad faith. It's a bit terrifying, frankly. But to make a long story short, they didn't find it, but then they said that they were going to restart the search anyway. They made an announcement a year ago, last December, that they were going to start looking again. It wasn't until March of this past year that they actually put the boat out into the search area. It spent about a month looking, searched about 5,000 square kilometers, which is a pretty small area in the grand scheme of things. And then they left again. And a lot of people are disappointed. And they said it was for bad weather because, the seasons are reversed down in the southern hemisphere. But now they're back. They're actually the ship. The update I have for you is that there's a new ship, like, they just built it this year. This company, Ocean Infinity, is expanding. The money behind it are these sort of billionaire investors. It's not really entirely clear what their whole strategy is. They're kind of secretive. There have been some big articles about them on Business Week. Did a big article about them, about who they are and everything. But they've when they first made that offer, it was a brand new company, and they only were renting ships from someone else. Now they not only have a fleet of over a dozen ships, but they're building kind of state-of-the-art, high technology, semi-robotic. These ships can operate without a crew, which is, to me, like, I don't get it. Like, if you're out in the middle of the ocean and, like, there's nobody there to fix the broken widget, like, what do you do? I'm, I guess, behind the times. That's how they do things these days. The ship now is in port in Bali. It was doing a mission in the Philippines. They were looking for shipwrecks in the Philippines. And now they're in Bali. They're going to set sail. And the thinking of the people who watch this is that they're going to sail down to the search area, probably spend a couple weeks there, and then they're going to sail to Fremantle, which is a shipping port near Perth, Australia, in the southwestern part of Australia. And then they'll reprovision. And what happened last time was they could either go back to the search area and look some more, or they will go and do something else. So that's really the status of it. They've got a very small area to look in. It's not really 100% clear to me why they think their odds are that good, but they think they're good enough anyway. My suspicion is that they have this equipment and, they might as well use it if they haven't got a gig. I mentioned they have a fleet of more than a dozen ships. And so all of these ships are deployed around the world. They'll might, survey for future oil exploration, or maybe they'll check on a oil pipeline or something, whatever deep sea research and maintenance vessels do, they're doing. But if you're in between gigs, you might be like, well, we've got a month, we've got nothing to do. Let's send the ship down there and check it out.
I was curious, because again, obviously I don't know. It doesn't seem like it'd be a booming business to make these heavy investments, but maybe pipelines, cables, and things like that. So do you know, is there new technology that might help them see further, see clearer? Or again, are they just, from what you understand, they're just think they might have a better shot and are going out there to try it again? What's your assessment?
So there is new technology, and somewhat surprisingly, technology has kind of come a long way from when they first started searching. The very first search that the Australian government funded was carried out by the Dutch, and they would basically tow this underwater sled that sent out these acoustic pings. And it's a bit like ultrasound, when you get your baby, a picture of your baby in the mother's womb. It's basically taking photographs with sound, you could think of it as. And they would tow it. And, towing, it's like mowing a lawn. It's very rigid. You go up, you go down, you go back and forth. It's very monotonous. And then when Ocean Infinity went back, they used a really different technology. They have these things called AUVs, autonomous underwater vehicles. They're robot subs, and they look like bright orange torpedoes. And they basically lower them into the water. They swim away, and because of the latest technology, they actually know where they are, even though they're 3 miles down in the darkness of the ocean, and they can coordinate to sort of form a pattern like a wolf pack down there. And so they can work together to scan much more quickly. So they were able to do in a couple months the same area that the earlier effort had done in 2 years. And the new version uses presumably whatever the upgrades are in the meantime. But it's not actually faster, which was a little bit surprising to me. The initial search was using, I forget, was it 6 or 8 of these things working together? The new efforts, which started in March and is about to continue in January, they only use 3. And part of that is because the vessels are a little smaller. These are the Ocean Infinity's own ships. They can probably operate them more cheaply, according to their own balance sheet. And so they're using vessels that aren't really optimized for scanning large areas of the seabed. And so I think that's why it's not quite so fast. Now, and the point that I make to people is, yes, the technology is new, but you're not going to see anything that isn't there. That's the key to success isn't having new technology. The key to success is having the plane be there. And a question that a lot of people always ask me, I get this all the time, is, well, what if it's there, but they miss it? And that's a question that the search authorities actually spent a lot of time thinking about. What if it's in a gully? If there's a gully on the seafloor, or it's behind the shadow of a big rock or something like that. And that there was actually, they went back and they did a review of the data long after the fact. And there were indeed areas where maybe the uplink cable is on the fritz for a second. And so you've missed that patch, or some, there are little hills. I mean, one thing that I think people should be aware of is that the seabed is not like the surface. On the surface, we get all kinds of weathering. Anytime there's water flowing, you've got gullies forming and all kinds of topological features, trees, buildings. There's none of that on the seabed. It's pretty much just flat. And so it's if you put your keys on a pool table, right? And then you photograph the pool table, you're going to see the keys. Like there's no way you're going to miss it. And some people say, well, it's very muddy. There's like a thick layer of sediment on the seabed. And that is true. It's kind of goopy down there. But these plane crashes have happened enough that when they sink to the bottom, you can indeed see them. So that's not really a concern. So I think that given the nature of how they're looking for it, given the nature of the environment, if it was there, they would have seen it.
Okay. So this would be good. Maybe just we talked about it in depth on the last podcast, but maybe we just recap a little bit of why they're searching in this area. Maybe some of your theory on it. Right. Some of the theories are out of like where this plane went, because there's obviously a lot of ocean out there and we have no idea. So maybe let's just recap a little bit of like how we got to this point.
Sure. Well, it's a long story. I'll give you the super bullet point version of it. The plane took off after midnight on March 8th, 2014. Flew off to the northeast towards Beijing. 40 minutes into the flight, just as it was passing the last waypoint in Malaysian airspace, like within seconds, it went electronically dark. They later found tapes or whatever. They realized that it was recorded on primary radar, taking a U-turn, going up the Malacca Strait, leaving primary radar, and then, because when you're no longer being painted by the radar, you're not seen anymore. You're invisible, and so it had vanished. And then 3 minutes later, 2 minutes later, something, it suddenly appears in a whole different way, which is that it starts sending these satellite signals to a company called Inmarsat, which is a satellite communications company. And so the thing that, and this is where I really value your expertise, the thing I wanted to ask you is, you probably have never flown a plane in which you've turned off the transponder, the ADS-B, you've gone electronically dark, and then you turn on the SATCOM. Like a plane would really normally never fly in that configuration, right?
I would say that's a fair statement, especially in again, I fly the 777, right?
Yeah.
You are not turning stuff off unless it's intentional, right? When you're going long range cruise, everything is basically set once you've taken off. You're obviously manipulating the control panel for altitude. Maybe you're going direct to waypoints and things like that. But, inherently everything is set and you're not changing anything. I will say this last trip, especially in some regions of the world and to maybe where MH370 was operating, you'll get GPS jamming. And so we actually inhibited our GPS just because of the GPS jamming that was going off, and then utilizing ground-based nav aids for where we were in this region, which again, it was in and around there. But again, you're not turning off ADS-B, turning off transponder, and then initiating your SATCOM and doing things like that.
Right. So I think I think something that a lot of people don't really get because they're not pilots. The story has been told as if this happened and then this happened and this happened, and like, okay, I guess that's what happens with planes. I think the media has done a really bad job of trying to convey is that what happened was really, really unusual. Like there's a part in the FCOM that says, like, you are forbidden to pull circuit breakers unless you are directed to do so by a checklist. Like you just don't go freelancing and just pulling things willy-nilly. Like it's dangerous and it doesn't serve any purpose. Like a plane is a complicated mechanism. You don't just like push the buttons to see what'll happen, right?
Well, especially in modern planes, especially like the 777.
Yeah.
That is not part of the training. So in my 3,000 or so hours in the 777, I've pulled one circuit breaker, and that was over Australia, where we had one of our FMCs was not working properly. But that's one of those. We call back via SATCOM to the maintenance operation facility, actually get a technical pilot on the line as well. We've run through the available checklist for that, and then maintenance directed to pull that circuit breaker, right? But it was a process. It was a 30-minute process where you're not just kind of willy-nilly versus, the time in the F-16, there are times where, yep, you're mayor of Cockpit City, you're running the checklist
Right.
and you're pulling circuit breakers and resetting stuff just based on known issues and troubleshooting, trying to isolate things. But in the civilian aviation world, airliner world, that is not something you're doing. Also, where you kind of said too, like the abnormal piece, just doing a 180 or turning around at
Yeah.
a waypoint without talking to anyone, without squawking emergency, is very abnormal.
Right.
Like you,
Right.
again, you wouldn't do that. That's a significant thing to do in this airliner world.
Okay, so the reason that they're searching in the seabed is because, as I said, after they left primary radar, very soon after they left primary radar, this box got turned back on. It's called a satellite data unit. It lives kind of in the dorsal area of the fuselage. It's above the economy class passenger cabin. And that got turned back on. And for a long time after the plane disappeared, I asked every single 777 pilot, how do you reboot the SDU? And you can tell me what your answer would be.
Did anyone get it right?
Well, the thing that everyone said is, what is the SDU? Like
Right,
that's not.
Yeah, that's right.
It's not something that you normally talk about. Like it turns on when you turn on the plane.
Yeah, there's so much that you don't have access to as a pilot. Now, granted, you have the circuit breakers over your head. If you were to tell me, yeah, turn off the SDU and for like, what is that? You know,
Yeah.
have we not talked about this before? There's just not something. And I would venture to say, technical pilots probably know that and deal with it. But your average, I'm going to go out on a limb here and say, my buddies who I fly with, if we presented them with that challenge, they would probably respond like I would, and they're much smarter than me. But still, it's just not something you don't manipulate that.
Yeah, and I talked to Ron Rogers in an earlier episode where I said to him, and I asked him the same question, and he's got like tens of thousands of hours, and he actually was involved in, I think he was working for United when they accepted the 777, and so they had actually their own test flight program. They wanted to sort of put it through its paces and understand it for their own purposes, and he was working with Boeing engineers. Because if you as a pilot have a question, like, how do I do this? Like, what is it? You don't just go, looking through the technical manuals. You would ask an engineer whose job it is to know, because you want to be right. It's important to be right. But so what you and I are talking about right now, John, is I think a really crucial and overlooked aspect of this case, which is that something happened, which is really weird. It's really unusual, and it's being treated, that aspect has been glossed over, where people are just like, yeah, and then the SDU got rebooted. And I've been saying, wait, stop. That's really weird. That's really bizarre. That's not something that would ever happen normally. And we have to, and so then, because the entire mystery then turns on that fact. So then they have this new data, and it turns out that because this rather complicated system of sending, processing information on the plane, re-encoding it for satellite transmission, sending it up to the satellite, having it downlink back, and all the processing and all the recording and everything, because that system was not working in the way it was originally engineered to work, navigational information had kind of leaked into it. That wasn't supposed to. If the system was working as designed, there would be no hints of where the plane went. But there were. And because of, two weird things now. One, that the thing was turned on at all, having been turned off, which is also another whole weird thing. And now there's it come to find, contrary to all expectation, there's actually information in it that we wouldn't expect to be there. Now we have to derive a new sort of mathematical formula to figure out what it means. But once we figured out what it means, it tells us where in the seabed the thing is. And this is where I sort of parted ways with all my colleagues, because I'm saying to them, look, you're about to spend hundreds of millions of dollars on a seabed search, which is predicated entirely on a very weird thing. It's a weird thing. And here's another thing, which is that it's weird and it's really hard to explain from the perspective of your own hypothesis. Now, what is your hypothesis? Now, I mentioned earlier that the thing went electronically dark within seconds of passing the last waypoint. Okay, so somebody is doing a bunch of things. They're turning things off. Most of all, they're flying the plane because they're doing this 180. And just 1 minute before that, we had heard the captain very calmly saying over the radio, "Good night, Malaysia 370." Now, he's calm. He doesn't sound like somebody who's got a gun to his head. So the assumption is, well, in a minute, somebody couldn't break through the cockpit door with fire axes without the flight crew making a mayday call, squawking hijack, whatever you would do, like presumably if someone's fighting you in the cockpit, especially post 9/11. So here's the assumption. Where do you fly a plane from? The cockpit. What's the total universe of all the places you can fly a plane from? The cockpit. That's it. That's your only choice. So you've got two people behind a locked door, like an Agatha Christie, mystery. It must be somebody that's in the manor house, right? And so it's either this highly experienced captain who's got over 10,000 hours, or it's the new guy who's just on his first official flight as a fully qualified first officer. So given how complicated all this is with all these boxes being turned off and on, it has to be the captain, right? And so everything that flowed from that, all of the assumptions are that it had to be the captain. He did all these crazy things. Okay, so why? Why would he do all these crazy things? It doesn't seem to make any sense. And you asked like you didn't know how to reboot the SDU. There's two ways to do it. One is to leave the cockpit, go to the area next to the first class lavatory, pull up the carpet, open the hatch, go down, go off to your left. There's a circuit breaker panel. And if you pull 3 circuit breakers, boom, this box goes dead. And then you can come back later and turn it back on if you want. That is a lot to do in the 1 minute between Goodnight Malaysia 370 and the thing going dark. So, and if it's done from the cockpit, what you have to do is to isolate the entire left AC bus. Now, you and I had talked earlier about how you're not supposed to pull a circuit breaker. Pulling a circuit bus, isolating a circuit bus is like pulling 30 circuit breakers all at once. Like that would be a really even more extreme, crazy thing to do, right?
It would. All right. So, one question, I'd like to put a pin in this, but real quick to address the search and why the search is occurring there. Is this, and I realize this is probably a generalization.
Sure.
And there's more detail to it, but they saw the search right there, the plane turns, and now it's based off of, hey, it had this much fuel on it, and it's flying this heading, so most likely it's going to land somewhere in this piece of ocean. Is that a fair assumption of why the search is, they're going out of Perth and they're searching that area, or is there more to that?
There's a little bit more to it. Well, there's a lot more to it, but I'll try to give you like a short version of it. There was 2 kinds of metadata that had navigational information. One of them was it's called the BTO. It's the time that it takes to send the signal and to receive the signal back. And that actually was operating normally, and that actually does tell you a lot about where the plane went. So that, in a sense, is navigational information. And what you get is a series of rings, and pretty much every hour, because the SATCOM wasn't being used, somebody had turned it back on, but they weren't actually using it to send voice or data. It's like your cell phone if you don't use it. Like they just found that alleged pipe bomber. The way they found him was that his cell phone was pinging all these towers. Even when he wasn't making any calls, when you have a mobile communications device, it needs to, in order for it to work when you want it to work, it always has to be figuring out where it is and what tower it can use to communicate with. And so anyway, in a sort of analogous way, this box every hour was checking in with the Inmarsat network via a geostationary satellite. And so you have these series of rings because the distance if you just know how far it is, you don't know where it is, but you know how far it is. The universe of all possible solutions is an arc essentially, or the whole solution is a circle. But like it can only fly so fast, so it could only go so far. Anyway, it turns out that if you look at those rings and you assume a speed, that tells you a route. The rings tell you the route. And if you allow certain variations in speed and you say, well, maybe the pilot wanted to change heading, there's various, if you allow changes in speed and heading, it becomes like sort of a fat line. There's a certain fuzziness to it. But the thing to know is that one of these, for every route that you make, there's a mirror route that goes the other direction. It's mirrored around the equator. And so this route tells you basically that it went to a certain part of the southern Indian Ocean. But it also tells you that it went north. It went north to Kazakhstan. And so in the first week after it disappeared, they didn't know which one was right. And so they started searching in the ocean, but they also started making inquiries, asking Kazakhstan, hey, have you seen this plane? So then there was another part of the data called the BFO, and that is very, very complicated. It's much fuzzier. It can actually be tampered with. And they use that to tell that the plane went into it was the southern solution was the correct one. So that's how they found, they wound up looking in the Southern Ocean. But it should have been a pretty cut and dried issue. They should have found it almost right away. And so they really don't have a good answer for why it's not there.
Yeah, again, assumption on my part. Based on that, you have time, you have the fuzzy route and the arcs. So you go to, in my mind, you go to the last point and you draw your 10,000 kilometer by 10,000 kilometers, whatever it might be. And it's going to be somewhere in this
Precisely.
area, right?
Yeah, that's exactly right.
And obviously we've searched there and they're going back to search in that same spot. So no different other than technology from what you can tell.
Right. And so because they've searched so the plane, it looks like from that BTO data, the BTO data really fits well with a plane flying at a normal cruise speed for a jetliner. And you fly a 777 commercially, and you probably get very strict instructions from your dispatch department about how what altitude you're supposed to fly, what speed you're supposed to fly. Because for airlines, there's like a math that's very fundamental to flight planning, which is what is fuel cost? What is the time of our crew cost? And so you kind of you can optimize and solve for like, how fast should we fly? Because if oil is cheap and pilots are really expensive, you want to fly really fast, because you don't care how much fuel you're going to burn.
Right.
And conversely, if you've crushed your union and pilots are working for free and the gas is really, really expensive, you want to kind of go at your maximum efficiency speed. And so there is a certain amount of, there's a number of different solutions you could have, but I forget exactly the point I was trying to make, but basically, there is a certain, because you don't know exactly how they flew or whether they changed headings a little bit, it could be in slightly different areas. But all of the good ones have been chosen. Oh, as I was saying, it looked like it was flying at a reasonable, in a straight line, because planes fly straight. If you're flying over the open ocean, like there's no sightseeing to be done, especially in the middle of the night. So just go to where you want to go. You're going to do it at your preferred airspeed. The airspeed can change as you get lighter. It actually gets more efficient to fly at a different speed. But whatever your sort of plan is, you carry it out. And it matches pretty well with that. And so when they first found the BTO data, they're like, oh, it's down here. It's at the far end of the arc. And then they found this other data and they started to get confused and they started to look elsewhere. But they assumed that the part of the data made it look like the plane was in a very steep and accelerating dive. Like somebody had pushed the nose forward and was almost in a vertical dive. And so given that, and also the reason that the last ping was sent was that the plane had run out of fuel. Because it run out of fuel, the generator stopped working. The STU stopped sending these signals. And then there was a little bit of reserve fuel in the fuel line to the APU, the auxiliary power unit, which turned on, and then after it takes a little time to spool up, but it started sending signals again. So we know that when the last signal was sent, presumably, the plane had been out of fuel for a while. So it had been losing altitude, probably maintaining speed, depending on what it was trimmed at. But it was losing energy, inevitably. And you can glide really far, but it's a one-way street, right? And so because it appeared to be in a dive, they figured it must be pretty close to where that last signal was sent. But it wasn't there. So we know that supposition was incorrect. So he must have pushed it into a dive, then changed his mind and glided it, and then changed his mind again and crashed it because this plane was in little pieces. It wasn't like a Miracle in the Hudson situation. So in order to kind of retcon a theory that makes sense but also matches the data, we have to get into this crazy sequence of events that doesn't really make any real sense from a pilot's motivational perspective. So he flew for 6 hours doing nothing, not answering the phone, not sending any messages. And then he waits and waits and waits. This is a funny way to commit suicide, to wait and wait and wait and wait. And then when you run out of fuel, then push it down into the ocean, then change your mind again. And that's the only reason we have any chance of success right now. And the point I've been trying to make is that you guys need to acknowledge how friggin' weird this story that you're telling yourself is. And the reason you're telling yourself this story is because you can't imagine any other way, because you believe in your heart and soul with 100% conviction that the only way to fly a plane is from the cockpit. And my perspective is that is true for all airplanes except the 777. And the reason the 777 is different, and maybe there's others that I just don't know as well as the 777, but it turns out that the 777 can theoretically be flown from the electronics bay. This is a subject that I am going to hit mega hard in January. I've been doing some really, really fascinating research, and I'm going to explicate this more. I can't really say more right now, but I am going to kind of see if that is literally a load-bearing hypothesis. That it can only be this. Because the story that they're operating off of right now, as I said, is just really, really weird for so many reasons.
Right. I would agree with you. And again, would also noting the fact that people are weird and strange things happen. Mm-hmm. And we've seen in recent times and between this incident and last, where unfortunately there's been suicide committed by pilots, murder-suicide, mm-hmm. It usually is pretty quick. You know, someone gets up to go to the bathroom, door's locked, and then the action is pretty quick. You're not waiting hours.
The slowest one was Germanwings, where he set the autopilot for 0 altitude as they were approaching the Alps. Right. But then he just kind of sat there passively and let it descend in. But that was a matter of minutes, not hours.
Right. And granted, I mean, different environments, so you can make an argument. But again, I've never thought about suicide, but I can imagine that maybe people go through it. They have change of hearts and things like that. But
the suicide is one thing. Murder-suicide, which is what these cases all are, is a whole nother dimension of and you're suffering, sure, but why would you do that?
Yeah, for hours. So very weird. I agree with you on that. Which lends to maybe a further discussion on some of your theories about, as you've alluded to already, controlling the 777 outside of the cockpit.
Right.
That, all right, if this isn't the case, if it actually in fact was not the pilots flying out into the middle of the Southern Indian Ocean, what else could have happened?
So very early on, like in the first half of 2014, I was asking I felt like the question we need to ask is, to be responsible, we have to ask, is there any other way that this data could have been generated? And again, it turns out that in a lot of cases, it's not. There's only 2 companies that make the SDU. One of them is called Rockwell. And the way it generates this value is it receives the incoming value, compares it to what the value should be, adds that change in the value of the frequency, and then sends it back out. So it can't really be changed, altered, or tampered with. However, that's not the box that this plane had. It had one from Honeywell or Thales, and it calculated that value based on its navigational information. And so theoretically, if you feed the box wrong information, you will get a wrong output. So I feel like it's pretty well established at this point that data can be spoofed. And I mentioned that the BTO data, which is really more robust and can't be spoofed, indicates that the plane could have gone to the southern Indian Ocean or Kazakhstan. Now, if the BFO data was spoofed, that means the plane went to Kazakhstan. And that was my theory. I'm like, well, is it possible that it went to Kazakhstan? Why would it have done that? Where exactly would it have gone? Are there places where it could have landed? And that's like a whole nother. The answer to all those things is yes. I mean, I think it all kind of makes a lot of sense, actually.
Okay.
But so as I've been seeing it for many years, is that given the data that we have, given our understanding of how it was generated, there's two distinct possibilities and no others. One of the big misconceptions about this case is that there's 100 theories as to what could have happened to it. And there are 100 ideas that people have talked about, but not every idea like really deserves the label of hypothesis. The idea that the moon is made of green cheese is not really a hypothesis because there's no evidence for it. And if you check it, you'll find it's not true. And so similarly, like a lot of people would like to think that it was a mechanical malfunction or something. It just doesn't stand up to scrutiny. So there's two possibilities that really deserve the title of hypothesis. One is that the captain did it, and it's in the Southern Ocean. The other is that third-party hijackers took over the plane from the electronics bay and flew it to Kazakhstan. A lot of people hear that, even my own kids. My kids, by the way, my youngest is 14. He was a toddler when I started working on this. He spent his entire life that he can remember, Dad has been talking too much about this missing plane. And he's now old enough that he's like reading on it and like watching YouTube videos, and he's like asking me really hard hitting questions. And I'm like, this is like, it's kind of great. It's kind of awful in a way. But
it's good. The
point,
poke holes at it.
He like pokes holes at it, which is fine. I mean, it's like one of the really awful things about MH370 is that so many people they get an idea and they just stick to it. They grab onto it and they get mad if you disagree with them. And that's not really how science works. You have to know that any theory can be wrong. And I think to understand a theory is to know how it could be wrong. And to ask the question, okay, what evidence can we gather? What questions can we profitably ask that would help us either increase the theory, the chance that this theory is right, or disprove it? How can I disprove it? What questions can I ask that will disprove this theory?
Okay. We have a lot to unpack, but why Kazakhstan? Why, like, if it didn't end up in the southern Indian Ocean, why is the only alternative?
Who could have taken it to Kazakhstan? Well, Kazakhstan is a close ally of Russia. And in fact, this is such a complicated and technically sophisticated act that it really would require a state level actor. And as it happens, Russia at that time was in the business of, well, for one thing, shooting down Malaysian Airlines 777s, of which there were not that many, but they shot one down 4.5 months later over Ukraine. They sent a anti-aircraft missile vehicle from Russia. It drove to this spot, sat in a field where all these planes went overhead, and then it blasted one out of the sky. And they've been convicted in The Hague for doing this. So it's a settled crime at this point. So we know that the Russian military intelligence was in the business of destroying Malaysian Airlines 777s in 2014. But they also did a lot of
quick sidebar. I mean, the odds of it being Malaysian Airlines and having this one disappear, I don't know if you draw some correlation between the two, but before the war kicked off, I flew that route many times. It's a very busy airspace. So there's a lot of planes that are flying around there, which I find, again, Malaysian Airs to have two of these back to back is just like unimaginable. But
it was so unimaginable that people just like kind of put the thing about MH370, John, is that time and time again, these really weird things happen. And to make it fit with the sort of default scenario that the captain did it, you just have to sort of say, yeah, weird stuff happens. And weird stuff does happen. But when it's just one damn thing after another, like nothing actually fits together, it's all kind of held together by a glue of weird things happen. And the other thing to know about Russia at that time was that it had just annexed Crimea. Everyone was like heaping scorn and derision on them for having done the first military invasions, since World War II, basically. Mm-hmm. And all of a sudden they stopped talking about it because of MH370. And what you see happening time and time again is Russian intelligence using really, really high technology to wage what's called hybrid warfare, like to try to destabilize and undermine the democratic West. And there was a motive for this. And let me just say that, the Skripals were these Russian dissidents who were poisoned using Novichok, which was like a brand new nerve agent that they had. Now, when you are inventing new poisons to kill your, dissidents, that's sophisticated. It might not be good. I'm not saying it's good, but you're using a lot of brain power to carry out evil. And they engage in these really super sophisticated hacks. They also engaged in a lot of really dumb hacks. Like they just did a phishing attack against the DNC, got these emails, and you talk about using your intelligence service to sort of upset the news cycle and to shift public attention to where you want it to go. Donald Trump was running for president. He had deep connections to the Russian intelligence apparatus, and this really damning thing came out about there was a whole bunch of really damning things about Trump, including the Access Hollywood tapes. And so when the media was starting to focus on that, within hours, through WikiLeaks, which was a Russian intelligence cutout, they're dumping all this information in order to change the narrative. So one of the things that's if the plane went to Kazakhstan, it's not just a different solution for this particular airline, crash or whatever you want to call it, incident. It's not just a solution to that incident. It's a whole. It sort of means that this was essentially like Pearl Harbor. It was like a first major attack of what would be an ongoing and actually quite devastating campaign. Because just last week, the Trump administration released its new doctrine document regarding Europe, and they basically want to undermine democracy in Europe, have a more nationalistic sort of supremacist vision of what so we're going forward, this world is going to look a lot more like what Vladimir Putin wants it to look like.
Well, I guess yeah, I mean, but I guess to jump back to
sure.
Why? What would be, I know that this had to be an assumption on your part, right? But why MH370, if you needed this thing to be a distractor,
right,
or to change the narrative or capture the news
why
cycle,
this plane?
Yeah, why not just and why this plane? And then also why not, if you could control it, just pack it into the ocean? I mean, so a couple of those questions popped to my mind, but again, why this plane first?
So as you say, I can only sort of make a theory, make a supposition. And my supposition for this is that when you find a vulnerability, if we look at it, if we sort of put on our cybersecurity hat, and we're supposing now that this is not a murder suicide, but a cybersecurity operation, then in order to carry out a hack, you need to find a system that's vulnerable. And so, as I mentioned, most planes, you can't take over from the electronics bay. Most SATCOM systems can't be altered to make it look like it's sending navigational information that's actually been spoofed. Very few aircraft, and I need to do an episode where I sort of break down what all the requirements are and how that narrows down the list of possible targets. But my theory is that basically there were very, very few targets that you could have attacked in order to carry out this particular vulnerability, which is a very, very specific vulnerability, which by the way, doesn't exist anymore. MH370 couldn't be carried out today, if my theory is right. Things have just been changed. For instance, one of the things is that the Inmarsat service, if you paid the premium and you were getting the highest level of service, it had encoded with every data packet the GPS location. And so there would have been no ambiguity as to exactly where this plane went.
Would that data not be captured anyways and just not shared with Malaysian Airlines because they didn't pay for it? Or is that?
It was not captured. It was not transmitted. Okay. And so, yeah, they would have otherwise. And so Malaysian Airlines was sort of in a bad state financially, and they kind of were cutting corners, and they paid for the cheapest level of service. And so that is one of the reasons why this mystery exists as a mystery, was because of that aspect of the case. And so that's why I think MH370 was targeted, and why the route into the ocean was chosen, because it paralleled the route. It mirrored the route to Kazakhstan.
Yeah, so this would have to be, this would be state actor level requirement of not only the capability to take a plane and control, but then also having like the awareness of radar coverage.
Yes.
So that you can shoot between the gaps.
Yep.
I also think too, just an initial waypoint, right? So if I'm a pilot sitting up there and the plane gets taken over and makes a 180 or makes a hard turn that you weren't planning on. And again, just recently had this right, but we knew it was GPS and we're able to disable it. Like, you start doing things, but if you disable the radios, they couldn't make a call. And then you somehow got in the cockpit to overtake the pilots. All right. That's how I could envision this scenario initially playing out.
Yeah.
If it was going to go this route. But I kind of go to, like, was there anyone on that plane, or is this like, hey, all right, this plane is vulnerable, so we can do it to this plane. And in your theory, like, take this plane, fly it to Kazakhstan, and obviously it dominated. We're still talking about it to this day, right? But especially right afterwards, it dominated the news cycle. So was there anything in particular outside of just this plane being vulnerable and susceptible to this type of attack that you think it got picked for?
There is like kind of a laundry list of characteristics that, like, it was near the equator when it started. And so then when the two mirror routes were created, they were like very different. So there is a list of things, and there's another aspect to it, which is a little bit more subtle. I think to me it's really important, but it's kind of subtle. And it's why I like talking to 777 pilots, because you guys live it and do it, and like what's normal, right? If you're a dog owner and you see a dog acting strangely, you'll pick up on it right away. And if somebody doesn't know dogs, like, they might not even know what a weird behavior is. Like a dog might have a weird look in its eye that you as a dog owner will know, and someone who isn't won't. Okay. So there's an aspect of this case that I've been thinking a lot about lately. I've come to think of it as the central paradox, which is, okay, we know that all these crazy things happened, like, going dark, pulling the 180, the SDU being turned off and turned back on again. They all seem to be evidence of sophistication. It would have taken effort. It would have taken planning. It would have taken resolve. I did an episode called Mindhunter where I talked about, like, all of the kind of psychological characteristics that we can deduce from this happening. And they also speak to a level of deception. So this plane went dark at the very, very beginning, within the first few seconds of a 3-minute gap. Like, there's minimum 3 minutes between when you say goodbye to one controller and hello to the next. So they've got a little bit of gap where no one's paying attention to them. That's when they do their big going dark and pulling the 180 and fleeing in the other direction. So they're basically making a run for it when the lights are off, the brief little moment when the lights are off. And so that speaks to a certain level of deception. And again, when you talk to people, you say, well, why did he turn the SDU on? Why would a pilot do this incredibly difficult thing that every 777 pilot I've said to says they don't know how to do it and they wouldn't do it? And the answer is, well, he really wanted to plan the perfect mass murder. He wanted to get away with it scot-free. And so he did all these things. Okay, here's the problem with that. Well, the point being that even murder-suicide people think that deception was a key aspect of this caper. Deception. And so if he wants to, so the problem with that is, okay, he engages in this elaborate game of deception. But another thing that you really can't deny is that as a result of all this happening, almost everyone in the world, except yours truly, is convinced that the captain did it. So this is the great paradox. Two facts of MH370 that seem directly contradictory. One, it was an incredibly successful act of deception, and B, the inescapable conclusion is that the captain did it. That's a really shitty, unsuccessful act of deception if it leaves everyone convinced that you did it. Is that the perfect crime? Not by my book.
Yep.
It's a really failed crime. And yet, so basically, what I'm basically been trying to say for the last 12 years is, what if those facts are not irreconcilable? What if the goal of this sophisticated and elaborate act of deception was that everyone thinks that the captain did it?
There's a lot here to unpack. And that, I mean, it all, and two, you even see with recent mishaps like Air India, we're starting to see bits and pieces come out about that. I mean, actually pretty clear cut facts. Yet no one's really, from what I've seen, no one's really talking about it. And it sounds like there's the NTSB, which was assisting on the case, and India's aviation authority are butting heads on this. But I can't, flying the 777, I imagine the 787, the fuel control cutoff valves are in the exact same spot or really similar, and they function in a very similar manner. Like you don't just accidentally manipulate it. So it's like pretty clear cut and dry. In my opinion, again, just reading what's out there of what transpired. But there's efforts to control the narrative for whoever it might be to push, nudge for whatever motivation. But to me, that is clear that there is forces out there that they're trying to control the narrative and push it. Again, what those motivations are, obviously I'm not privy to, but I can believe.
I think it was the case of Air India. I did an episode too about Air India where I basically laid out a case that others have made with more expertise than me. What you're alluding to is that really the only way these switches could have been flipped is if somebody did it. We actually have cockpit audio of one of the pilots saying to the other, "Why did you just do that?"
Right. It's pretty clear cut.
It looks very clear cut. It looks very much like in my mind, I called it evil genius because I feel like it's really, in a way, smart. If your goal is to do something really evil, it's really smart because you flip off these fuel switches and you're basically a dead man walking at that point, because it's going to take a little bit of time for the other pilot to realize what's happening, flip them back, try to get the engines restarted. It's too late. You haven't got the speed, you haven't got the altitude. And what happened was inevitable at that point. And you don't have this struggle at 30,000 feet. We talked about this before.
Right.
And to me, like the point I was trying to make was that we should be scared because somebody just invented a better way to commit mass murder suicide, which is not good in my books. And I don't even know.
That might be why they don't want that information out there, because if people really knew how easy it was to shut the engines off. And again, I think with the 78777, it's going to auto restart. But again, as you've alluded to, like that's the perfect one. Like where those switches were cut off and turned back on, unrecoverable. There's not enough altitude to get those engines restarted and flying. Again, it's at that point the decision is made. There's no other option other than fly this thing to the crash site. So,
and you're right. I think there's an attempt to manipulate the narrative. It's not a mystery. I don't think. We saw this actually with Air Egypt as well, where the NTSB said this looks like mass murder suicide, and the Egyptians, who are the equivalent of India in that case, where it was their plane and their pilot, they didn't like that. Understandably.
Yeah. So that might be, again, assumption is where that information is being controlled, because it does seem pretty clear cut when you look at what's known so far. Like, again, those fuel cut off and back on, that is a physical action that, again, you can't just bump. And then with the cockpit audio from the first officer saying, "Why'd you just go cut off?" Like, that's, again, pretty clear.
One of the things that's happened in the last, I don't know, 20 years or so, is that rise of digital has really decimated journalism, and one of the first to get fired are subject matter expertise people. I got to know Miles O'Brien during the MH370 on CNN, and he saw it. They used to have like an aviation desk at CNN, or a science desk, I forget. Anyway, they had all of these people who specialized in that area. And, now you can just Google it. Like, we don't need to have a guy who understands these things. If something happens, we'll just Google, what does this mean, And so the result of that is that you have a lot more deference to authority, and you have a lot less willingness to, as Richard Quest accused me of doing. He said that I had gotten ahead of my skis, or gotten over my skis. And the idea that like you don't dare put two and two together. Like you're an expert in flying a 777, flying a Boeing airliner. You know how these fuel switches work. You have direct personal experience. You sit next to them every day, and so you put two and two together like pretty quickly. But if you're sitting on a desk and you've never even heard of a fuel shutoff valve, then you're just gonna have to basically be a stenographer. You're gonna have to repeat what officials are telling you, and that means it's very easy to manipulate the narrative.
Yeah. And there's so much information out there. And now obviously the rise of AI, like sometimes you're watching a video, you're like, I don't think that actually, this is not funny story, right? But I saw it 3 weeks ago, and the platform you and I both use to record, I don't know if it's a feature now where you can voice over in different languages.
Yeah.
And I was watching this video. It was actually on video editing. It was a technique I was trying to bring into editing. I was just like watching really close. I'm like, that actually does not look like natural mouth movement. He's speaking English. And then it went to his computer screen, and it was Hindi. It was a completely different language. I don't know what languages it was, but like,
wow,
clear. But it was so good. And had I obviously, I guess, not been attuned to this recent feature update that really made it more or less free and easy to change it, it's like, okay. So again, it's just, it's only continuing to snowball and evolve.
It makes things worse. It really makes things worse, because it will lie shamelessly and easily. And so I do get people saying, oh, hey, listen, I asked AI what the answer to this was, and it told me this. And I'm like, please don't send me AI opinions. Because they just don't know. And I mean, I had an experience where I do sometimes use it. I kind of use it almost like a kind of parallel Google. I want to see if something is plausible. Like I ask it all the time. I'll say, well, does it work like this or does it work like that? And I have to really take it with a grain of salt. I use it to sort of show me point me in the right direction, and then I will Google to try to find a reliable source, or ask someone like you. I asked it something about Boeing. I was asking Boeing controls, and I said, "Does Boeing control like this?" Blah blah. It's like, no, the 777 uses a side stick controller. I'm like,
It's big. It's a big difference.
Now, if I didn't know,
right,
then I would have done okay.
Yeah.
And it's like that. It's like it's 90% true and 10% false, which almost is worse. Like if it was 50% false, you would just know not to trust it. But I think it kind of takes people in,
ever so subtly. Yeah. I think that's been in my experience as well. Is 90% of it will be factual and true, but it throws one thing in there that catches your eye. You're like, I don't believe that. It turns out it's false. So then you're like, well, now everything you've told me is invalid. Or I really have to look at it.
But if you want to believe it, and this thing is telling it to you,
100%.
You're not going to say this is probably the problem of like human psychology that we didn't really have to think about before, but now we do, is if you tell somebody something that they want to believe, they do not check the label.
It makes it easier, right? We've obviously seen that, I think, really come to a head over the last decade or so, right? And it's just easier. Like, I want you to tell me, I want you to validate my assumptions and my opinions. And if you do it, then I'm just going to keep listening to you, rather than check it. Okay. So, sorry, digress a little bit. I was like, to Kazakhstan. So how do we get a plane? How and why? I guess really I'd like to dig into, like, if, to poke holes in this, more or less, like,
right.
that's still a lot of ground to cover between the waypoint it disappeared
Right.
to making it up to Kazakhstan.
Yeah.
There's satellites. It is a big plane, and ironically enough, like it's difficult to see and also easy to see, tough to hide. It might be easy to hide, and you got a bunch of people on board. So there's a couple challenges, I would say, when it comes to, all right, hey, we're going to disappear the plane. Why am I going to do that? And then how am I going to do that?
We talked about what are the characteristics for this thing to be successfully hijacked to the north. One of them is nighttime. It took place after midnight. We know that the Thai and Indonesian radars did not detect it, even though it was flying within their areas of coverage. So we do know that, and presumably because it was after midnight, presumably because none of these countries was in a state of, it's actually a little surprising that Malaysia had primary radar coverage. They have no enemies. They're not in a state of alert. I don't even know, like, why does Malaysia have Sukhoi 27s or whatever they're flying? I mean, who do they expect to attack them? And so anyway, we do know that some countries don't have their radars turned on at night. We do know that primary radar, it's expensive and it costs money to put the electricity into it and the staffers to run it. And if you don't have a threat, you might want to have the radar unit, but just leave it turned off, especially after midnight when you're not really expecting anything. So we know that so it would have flown over the Andaman Islands, which is an Indian owned island chain in the Indian Ocean. They said early on that they had an installation there, but it was not turned on. It would have flown over Kolkata, which is a pretty big airport. There are air defense units in the area. That to me is the place where if it was going to get seen by air defense, that's where they should have seen it. Because after then, it sort of goes over Nepal, which I don't even know if they have an air force, would have gone over the Himalayas, a far western part of China, where they do have, it's like practically uninhabited desert. And you're in the shadow of the Himalayas, so like India can't see you because you're hiding on the other side of the mountains. China has very few scattered bases there. At that time, it's very high altitude, so it's operationally very challenging. And so around those times, they would deploy there for like a couple weeks or months at a time. I don't really know what their deployment history was. It's entirely possible that there was a primary defense radar in one of these areas that was turned on that would have seen it if it was there. I don't know. But people, when I said earlier, like when you have a theory, you want to ask, how can it be disproven? That's one way it could, if Nepal stood up and said, hey, we were looking at everything, we have distinct radar tracks for these other things, nothing matches what you were saying. That would kind of put it to rest. But nothing like that has come up. So after you get past Western China, you're into like Tajikistan, Kyrgyzstan, the Stans, and these are all kind of Russian satellite states. And so if this was a Russian operation, you're basically scot-free.
And obviously, I've only been on the flip side, flying over those areas like Western China, for instance, or other parts of that world. So like Calcutta, that would be one that again I would agree that if anyone's going to see someone, like you would think they would be it. Western China, there's stuff out there. A lot of when you fly in China, you do a lot of offsetting. And my only assumption there is like you'll offset your planned route by 5 miles, 3 miles, 10 miles assigned by ATC. And I'm making the assumption there, the reason they're doing it is because of procedural reporting, like radar coverage lacking, et cetera. So they need to separate people off these routes. But again, you could, if you made the argument too, well, we had, they're military bases out there. But again, just like if we think of our bases back here, they're not, most of them are not 24/7, or if they're 24/7, the 24 part of it, or the late part typically is people guarding the base. If you do have a SAM battery there, maybe it's not running unless you anticipate some kind of threat. And again, where this is in Western China, I'd have to look at a map, right? Like, are they popping off with India at this time? So they are worried about people crossing the border.
They weren't.
Not?
I mean, they have subsequently, and I think another thing a couple of things. One is that this area is sort of an aviation desert. If you look at flight radar and all the flights in the world, there's like a big hole in it. And the reason is that the altitude. So if you have an emergency decompression, you have to go down to 10,000 feet so that you can have air to breathe. The ground in this area is higher than 10,000 feet. So you can't do an emergency descent in case of depressurization. And for that reason, there are no planes that fly over this area. And if they do, like Lufthansa had a flight that went over this for a while. They have like special training, special like oxygen supplies, because normally your oxygen would run out before you get down. And the passengers only have, 12 to 15 minutes or something. So you have to have special equipment. So there's
when we fly certain routes there because of the altitude, there's like L888's a route.
Right.
And it's for engine failure. If you lose an engine, just like when we cross the ocean or we're doing ETOPS, the extended time, you're doing procedures to set up for ETOPS and getting released and working with dispatch. You still have to set up certain routes inside your FMS because of the altitude. We call them spider routes. So if you lose a motor, you're going to start drifting down. Well, now I need to know how to go out this canyon, et cetera.
Okay.
So there's a lot of high terrain. I mean, challenging things, but again, it's very desolate. There's not a whole lot out there. I guess the whole point of this is that is a problem to overcome, how to not get seen,
right,
and not to be in an echo chamber. I can see it being plausible that if those are the points that are the countries you're navigating across to get to Kazakhstan, doesn't seem like it's the furthest possibility that you could do that unavoided, middle of the night, even if it was picked up on radio. I mean, is the guy getting coffee? Is he asleep?
Right.
Is there anything there to begin with? If you do see something, you got no fighters to scramble. Like, are you going to admit that, oh yeah, by the way, we do have a void in our air defense network and we couldn't address it? You know, China's not going to publicize that to the Western world.
Air defense networks are things that you don't talk about because you know, a part of having a defense system is not people not knowing, like, you know, if you've got 7 doors and only one guard, you know, you don't want them. You want them to know that you want them to think that the guard could be behind any one of those doors.
100%.
Right.
Interesting. Okay, so that would be a challenge to navigate that far, I think, without being seen or talking to anyone. However, I see it as, I mean, to me at least, it seems like it is possible to do, like at night, and again, not knowing the capabilities. Like some of these countries, again, a lot of reporting points. If you don't check in right away, you mentioned the 3 minutes. Like if you're flying around Europe and you don't check in, I've actually said in one of the ATC facilities where someone's not checking in and it's already flagging and signs or warning signs are going off, and they're already talking to whoever is on alert, letting them know, hey, we might have someone. And then the person pops up on the wrong frequency and they find them and it's all sorted out. But when you're flying over, you know, Southeast Asia or flying over Indonesia, and there's sometimes it's just HF radio. There's not a lot of coverage. So again, like doesn't seem too crazy in 2025, let alone in 2014.
Yeah. I mean, and again, like, people are like, oh, it's one of these many, many, many crazy theories. It's like, no, actually, it's either this or that. Like, that's the entire universe of possibilities. And another thing that kind of casts doubt on the pilot suicide theory is that it's not on the seabed. So how do you explain it's not on the seabed? And on top of all the other weird things. And so we really are trying to find what could have happened to this plane. And so people who think, well, it would have been picked up. Are you sure? Because I feel like this is such an important mystery that we really have to kind of get down on our hands and knees with a magnifying glass and tweezers and go through every possible relevant piece of information. And a thing that I keep thinking about, coming back to, are assumptions. Like, you assume that this would happen, and a lot of times it turns out not to be. When this Inmarsat data first appeared, you saw a number of stories where, like, oh, the pilot had gone electronically dark, turned off the ADS-B, turned off the transponder, but forgot to turn off the SDU. And that was a very reasonable assumption, because why? Who even knows about these things? Why would he know that it existed, that he would turn it off? And so when it turned out that assumption was wrong, that was a major, major, major development in the case, as far as I was concerned. And so a lot of people will just hit you with the assumptions, and very dangerous, especially in the case of MH370.
Okay, so why do I take it to Kazakhstan?
Well, the theory puts it in Kazakhstan because of the BTO data. Like, again, we have a
Okay.
pretty narrow path to where this plane would have gone. Why Russia would have done it is that this is a place you can take it, that you can avoid, presuming you have this kind of. Russia is very famous for kind of testing its adversaries' radar networks. And Russia would know all about Malaysia's radar networks because they had sold them fighter jets. And I think if you're a fighter pilot, you know that inherent in the operation of fighter aircraft is understanding the radar environment, the air defense environment, right? So they knew probably everything there was to know about Malaysian radar, what the limits of it were, when you would be free of it, etc. And so Kazakhstan is a place that you can get to, and the route, because your plan, a core part of your plan is that you're going to leave a false trail of electronic breadcrumbs that lead off. It's a sort of electronic daisy path, or what that expression is, lead me down the rose path. What's that expression? You know what I'm saying? Anyway, they're being led down the path, off to somewhere where they're not going to find it. And that route mirrors that. And so, and it's also the closest, like Russian friendly territory that you can get to.
You think, was there anyone on that plane that, like,
there was two ethnic Russians from Ukraine, and there was a Russian in first class. And I spent a lot. I even went to Ukraine. I went to these guys were from Odessa. I went to Odessa. I tried to figure out. They supposedly had a furniture company with a factory, but I've never. I talked to a lot of people in the Ukrainian furniture industry. They'd never heard of these guys. I hired a guy off of Fiverr or some equivalent of Fiverr in Ukraine to a bunch of people actually to just try to ask around. And this guy told me that his father-in-law knew these guys, and they worked in the black market or the gray market. There was some area near the airport where people sell furniture that kind of fell off the back of a truck. Why these guys were these guys were supposedly going to a furniture show in Malaysia, which there was actually a furniture show in Malaysia that week. But then there was another furniture show in Guangzhou 3 weeks later, and these guys were flying to Beijing. They'd cut short the furniture show in Kuala Lumpur and we're going via Beijing to Guangzhou, which is a bit like flying to Chicago via LA.
Yep.
So it's not, I haven't been able to prove anything about these guys, but it doesn't really add up. So I don't like to say that they are suspects, but if this is a high level intelligence operation, you get somebody on board. It has to be done on board.
Yeah. I mean, you'd think too, if you're going to Guangzhou, you probably massive airport, puts any of our airports to shame. But you also have Hong Kong, so I mean, Guangzhou, you can go anywhere in Southeast Asia, I would imagine. If not, Hong Kong's just right there too.
It doesn't quite add up.
Versus Beijing, yeah, Beijing, that's quite a hike, and that's a good analogy, I think, the way you put it. We did. I think I realized we probably have glossed over just a little bit because we've talked about it previously. Then my experience, I just make the assumption, the operating premise was someone getting into the avionics bay and controlling it. If someone has not been on a 777, to me, again, this is something that's completely plausible. If someone hasn't ridden in business class, especially at night on a 777, our bay is right when you come in to our supernumerary area. It's I don't know, a 2.5 by 2.5 foot door that's in the floor. You just open it up. Sometimes it's open up because avionics or maintenance has been down there working on. In a passenger configuration, it's going to be in the same relative spot, if not the exact same spot, because the configurations change on the different planes. But, you think you take off, they do the meal service, all the lights get dimmed in the cockpit. The bathroom probably in that configuration was up there. But, the flight attendants start, their rest cycle if they're going to do that. I mean, again, it's just everything is kind of dark. And again, it wouldn't be too difficult just to run up there and jump in that bay. I
Hmm.
don't think to open the latch and climb down it. So
One thing
again,
I
we
wanted
kind
to
of
ask, one thing I wanted to ask you, John, is like, what would you do? Imagine you were like you're in the cruise phase and you've got a whole bunch of hours. You leave your co-pilot to fly, and you go back to just stretch your legs, and you leave the cockpit. You walk back towards the cabin, and you notice that the carpet is like askew. Like, what would you think? Like, what would you think?
So obviously it's nice that I just fly with boxes, but if I saw that, if that was, we have a little mat over it, you know, if I really noticed like it had moved and no one, and I had been back there and the last person back there, and like if I closed it up, we took off and came back and that mat was moved, you might think you have a stowaway, right? And
Mm,
I could imagine too, if you thought if I'm in a passenger configuration and that was moved, like, well, did someone slip on it
mm,
and move it? Sometimes I see they do have security tape on them. I don't know what the procedure is to have like
mm.
what requires the security tape on it versus not, because again, a lot of our stopovers, they're down there. And you'll see
Mm.
too, like I've had it where they've left the light on down there. You're doing the pre-flight and you can see it coming up from the rudder pedals. So you got to we
Mm.
call maintenance to come back out and go turn off the switches and climb down in there. So I
That's
can see it,
interesting.
being a couple different, like, hey, did someone walk by? Because ours will move, like
Mm.
it can slip. So you just make the assumption that, oh yeah, someone walked by here or the drink cart caught it and moved it. Or
Yeah.
yeah, was it like flipped up? Like the
Yeah. Yeah.
hatch had been opened and then closed. That might be a different case. Like you open it up and peer down there, see if anything's down there, see if you catch a light.
Yeah.
But you should, I would imagine I would imagine in all configurations, if they turned on a light, that is installed down there, not using a flashlight. And even if they used a flashlight, maybe you would catch a flash underneath the rudder pedals or avionics bay down there. But maybe not. If you're just using a little red light, maybe you don't catch it.
Mm.
So again, there's a lot
That's
of
interesting.
yeah possibilities.
Yeah, that's really interesting. So, okay, here's a crazy question. Feel free to say no. I'm not going to be hurt. Can you like have visitors on your plane when you're on the ground?
So, I mean, every major airport is going to have security procedures in place. Obviously, in the United States, it's going to be TSA. So if
Hmm.
someone is going to go out with the plane, they have to be escorted. It has to be approved. They're going to go through security. Now, that said, right, like there are a lot of people who are working in and around the airport environment inside the fence who are contractors.
Right.
Food, we have catering that comes on the plane. People are cleaning the plane. You got maintenance that's on the plane.
I'd have to
Uh,
get permission. I could imagine like if your employer would have to approve it. I can't just go
right,
visit my friend John at the airport. Like it has
correct.
to get approved. But I could imagine like PR saying like, "Oh, which they
Uh,
probably wouldn't, but if they did,
yep.
that's what it would have to probably be. They'd get me a badge and they'd accompany me, da da da."
Yep. So it definitely is possible. There's just there's a procedure for it, and probably is similar, but varies from airport to airport of what it takes to get on the plane, and that
Hmm.
person just has to be escorted.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Okay. Very interesting.
So if you want to do it, let me know.
Okay.
We'll figure it out.
That would be awesome.
I'm sure there's a way.
Okay. That would be great video, I think. There are videos, there's quite a lot actually of videos online of people like pulling up the carpet, going down in, and like there's a lot of video of like exactly the boxes that I'm interested in. There's like videos of that. I've like found it all. It's like it's pretty amazing actually in this day and age what you can
Well,
find.
um, again, I don't want to be like the echo chamber here, because again, it could be anything. Maybe it's a mix of different things.
Yeah.
But we have seen, I'm pretty sure it's the open source. We've had some of our, drones that have been spoofed and taken over by adversaries, right?
Yeah.
Um, and that's remotely. Now, maybe you can't do it remotely, but if you have access to these systems because you're you fly them in your country, or assuming this would be a nation state actor who's doing something like this, then yeah, of course you'd have time to figure out how to manipulate
I
these
mean,
systems so you could execute the game plan.
it's something that seems really weird to most people. And the thing I have to remind them is that something that seems very arcane to you is something that a whole bunch of people get up, put on their pants every morning and do that all day.
Yeah.
And, both Russia and the United States have very advanced electronic warfare programs, cybersecurity programs. There's a whole new there's a whole sort of sub industry of aviation cybersecurity now. When MH370 happened, it was the idea of electronically hacking an aircraft was really weird and new. And it's something that has happened a lot since. GPS spoofing is a kind of hacking. And there's a kind of, I've done episodes about the Sentinel hack, where the Iranians basically spoofed a GPS signal to this drone and made it think it was somewhere that it wasn't, and it landed, and they took it over, and then they built these Shahed drones, which are now Russia is using to great effect against Ukraine. So there's what in cybersecurity they call it the surface area of attack, and it's absolutely vast with civil aviation, and it's something that, as a journalist, there's a kind of a conundrum about these vulnerabilities. It's like, do you talk about them and risk other people exploiting them, or do you not talk about them and risk having them be unattended to and just open, like the door remains unlocked, essentially?
Yeah,
Now,
so
one approach is to go to Boeing, go to the supplier, and
Yeah.
say, hey, I found a vulnerability, you should fix it. And that's how the white hat hackers generally operate. I'm a journalist. My job is to get the public riled up, because my basic attitude in all this, why am I talking about this for 12 years? My wife would love me to stop talking about this because it's boring as hell. But I feel like as long as this door remains unlocked and people don't really understand the nature of the conflict that we're in, we're basically having the shit kicked out of us day in and day out for 12 years, and it's starting to show.
Interesting you say it. I believe I've seen like one blip about cybersecurity, and I know more have talked about it when it comes to aviation. But ironically enough, I had a gentleman, Joe Wise, on the podcast about a year and a half ago, and he's an industrial control systems engineer.
Oh, wow.
And for the last like 2 decades, he has basically been banging the war drum about industrial control systems. He's like, it's not super sexy. You don't talk about it. And these are the things, right? They're monitoring pressure, flow, voltage, designed to do it remotely for engineers and technicians all across the globe, right? But as these came about really in the 90s, being connected to the internet, you had all these different vendors who were creating them. They were doing them for different entities, different projects, different systems for different needs, right? But no one was thinking about cybersecurity when these things were developed. No one thought about, oh, well, one day, yeah, an adversary might take this and like over pressurize this system and blow out, this pump and, kill water or electricity to this town. And so, he goes into talk about like, all our transformers. Well, they're built in a certain country, or at least they used to be, and probably still most of them are today. And then they've shown up with overt extra components on them. And the DOE goes and scoops them up. We're like, why would you have them? So we don't know what we had. I mean, he has some interesting stories, but again, being, at least tied into obviously the aviation world, but I'm by no means an expert when it comes to aviation cybersecurity. I think there probably are parallels that exist between these two worlds of industrial control systems and aviation.
It's the same. A plane is an industrial control system. I mean, it's like you've got actuators, and that is I'm actually going to go watch that episode right now and see if I should talk.
Well, again, if you are worried about building the best hydraulic actuator to control a flight control surface, in 1998, was I focused, or 1993 or whatever? I mean, am I really focused on cybersecurity that like, oh yeah, I do have this sensor in here that, oh, maybe that could be manipulated, and just manipulated so that it goes full open or full closed,
right,
and causes a plane, right? So like, I think maybe more of that today. And I think that's why it's important to talk about these like the people who are going to do the bad things are already out there trying to exploit them. I definitely haven't given him the idea, but I never thought about it till I actually heard him talking about all these industrial control systems. Like you and I, everyone listening to this or watching it, we probably have 20,000 industrial control systems between us and, the lights coming in, the water coming into our house.
Your light bulb has a computer in it now.
Right. Right. So we really can get really terrifying going down the rabbit hole of like,
well,
what's out there.
So obviously when Orville Wright, flew Kitty Hawk, or I forget which one flew, but anyway, they weren't worried about cyber hacking. Right. But eventually planes got more and more computerized. And eventually when you get to like 787, A350, that kind of thing, like it's mature enough that like people are aware of the danger, things are a little bit more secured. But there's a kind of a transitional level, and it's 777 kind of sits right in the middle of it, where there's a lot of reliance on computers, but nothing is secured because they just hadn't really thought about the potential vulnerability. That's just not where their heads were at. And so in 2014, quite interestingly, the FAA commissioned a report on fleet-wide cybersecurity vulnerabilities. This I can't tell exactly when it was commissioned. It was before or after MH370. But suddenly in 2014, which is not long after that Sentinel hack in Iran, they started to worry about, oh, wait, how could you take over a plane? Or at least what are the vulnerabilities? And the 777 was the one that had the most vulnerabilities for just very reason. It's sort of a transitional technology.
So, as we've kind of talked about here, a couple different avenues. One, this was pilot suicide, is very elaborate. Doesn't seem like it was murder suicide, right? It wasn't it was outside the norm for what we have seen people who do that, right? And again, not saying it can't happen, but there was a lot of effort to take it really far away for a long period of time. And then yes, no, whatever the logic is versus what we've seen transpire.
I mean, again, presumably this is a guy who spent an extraordinary amount of time and attention and pouring through technical documents to carry out an attack whose end result is that everyone thinks he did it.
Yeah. So why would you do that? The other piece too, which we really haven't talked about, right, is like, some people think UFOs or orbs or something just like absorbed this piece. And I think a lot of that's predicated on video evidence coming from off-board like UAVs, right? And again, I don't want to be in an echo chamber and just say, well, this is the way it happened. I'd be curious. I see that, and coming from my background, I think in this environment, the questions I have, and I don't know if you have any thoughts on it. I think it's based upon, having a surveillance like an AWACS airborne that helps track this, as a UAV that just happens to have its camera ball slewed in the right direction that captures it. Like, am I anywhere? Like, I've just seen blips and pieces about this, but like,
I think about this as little as I can. I mean, to me, it just speaks about a profoundly corrupted information environment where two of the most prominent, like the people that are getting millions of clicks, one of them is just like the most ridiculous fraud. I mean, it's a cartoon to me, and it's like none of it's. And another thing too is that like MH370 didn't vanish. Like people think that, oh, it's the plane that the Netflix show that I was in was called The Plane That Disappeared. It didn't just disappear. It didn't just blip out. It went here, it did this, it turned around, it did this, it left the radar, it kind of turned on back again. It flew for all this time, and then this other thing happened. Like a whole bunch of things happened over the span of 7 hours. It didn't just go blip. So that's you're not even like solving the right mystery.
I guess so. With that, from what I understand it, right, is as you outlined, obviously data is being BTS data, right, is being provided for hours afterwards, right?
Right.
But where this video that I've seen pop up and there's like orbs circling the plane and it disappears, like clearly that data just would continue down this breadcrumb trail for hundreds of thousands
and also
of miles, right?
Orbs aren't real. I mean, that if you've seen it, you saw it in a science fiction movie. Black holes are real, but like wormholes aren't a technology that exists. Like if that was real, the fact that it solved MH370 would be the least of it. Like we would be living in an entirely new era where things exist that don't, like magic. We live in a world of like we're in Harry Potter world all of a sudden, right? And so that is one huge thing that I'm constantly running up against. People are always in comments saying, "Oh, the orbs took it." I'm like, "There's no such thing as orbs. Orbs aren't real. That's not a thing."
Yeah.
And then the other thing is we've got this other guy, I alluded to him earlier. He's like this, he claims to be an aeronautical engineer. He was really involved in the independent group, which got a lot of credibility early on in the search for it. Now he's just promoting all of these made up theories that sound, a lot of gobbledygook. It sounds like scientific. He claims he's got this academic from Leicestershire or something working with him. It's a very different kind of fake from the orbs. It has a veneer of credibility attached to it. So it's in a way like, it's less like fun than the orbs because people love UFOs. You're going to get millions. If you say like a UFO stole MH370 and you've got a good, like shiny, colorful video, yeah, let the clicks happen. But this other guy, it's a little bit more erudite. It's like more sophisticated, but it's just as false. And so I feel like, and I'm me just trying to put the pieces together, and it's like kind of boring. The thing is, right now in this day and age, you and I are both YouTubers, so we see the data, we see what people watch, and we even get AI recommendations on the control panel saying, "Oh, you should do a video about like how the authorities are lying to us," you know, and you know. It's easy to get kind of pulled towards what people want. And if your mission is to do something different, like my mission is to solve the case through, and whatever arcane pathways I have to go down to do that, I'm going to do it, and whether or not the audience follows me or not. Whereas some of these other guys are like, I'm going to say exactly what people want to hear.
Yep. Well, I'm curious. I would like to circle back, hopefully in January or after January, because as you've alluded to, we were talking on the phone. Again, taking scientific approach to try and determine if, hey, this is even plausible, or I guess further plausible. To me, it seems very plausible that, this could be a path that transpired. A lot of questions of why, and then again, there's a lot of the stars have to align in the right spot. But I mean, today we've seen crazy things happen, right?
In fact, we're seeing too many crazy things happening. Like all the time. It's like we're kind of flooded with it, actually. And so it gets hard to kind of figure out what you should pay attention to and what is like too crazy. And it's a really challenging environment. But no, I would love to circle back with you in January. I think a lot of stuff is going to be happening in January. The message I try to tell people is this is a case that we can solve. There's a lot of threads that we can pick at. I don't know if we'll succeed, but I know what we can do to try. And as long as we have possibilities, I am, it's not a question. Of course, I'm going to like try to pick at those threads. But it's great to, John, I really appreciate your interest in it. And it's great. And I love that you can share your perspective as well, because this is what we need. The world is very complex and expertise is so crucial. You are a legitimate, certified, card-carrying 777 pilot. You have knowledge that only 777 pilots have, and one of the superpower that a journalist has is the ability to go to people in a wide. Because I need expertise from like 25 different fields in order to solve this mystery. And if you just assume, I assume a 777 pilot would do that. That's when you fall afoul. You have to really try to nail it down, as I said, on the hands and knees with a magnifying glass, and really work through every little detail. And it's fun. I really like it. I mean, it bores people to tears that aren't into it.
Well, it's complex, and the stuff you're talking about, and I think that you're going to be testing, is complex. Like I mean, you're in the beeps and squeaks and hanging on there. Yeah. But like inherently, the plane is controlled by beeps and squeaks. It's manipulated with a pilot interface that's easy with knobs and buttons to type into. But again, I can envision that there's a lot of computers. I mean, I've seen them. There's a lot of computers downstairs in the avionics bay that, you could manipulate and change things I don't know.
Complex things happen, and one of the insights that I've had in studying this case is that if you can operate at a higher level of complexity than your adversaries, then you can do things that your adversaries won't understand. And I mentioned that my 14-year-old is now old enough to really get into this case, and he said to me, the thing he said to me sort of warmed the cockles of my heart. He said, Occam's razor, Dad. Simple answers are the best. And I said, simple answers are not adequate for complex phenomena. And if you know that your adversary is going to adopt an Occam's razor mindset, that's basically how magic happens. That's how a stage magician is able to carry out their deception, because they know the audience is going to assume, well, I would never, put a lady like into a box with her legs all tucked up so that it looks like her, she's cut in half, Right. So that's how it works. That's how deception works, by understanding the assumptions that your adversary is going to make. And Occam's razor is a big way to put yourself in a box.
Yeah. There's so much to unpack here. So do you think, as we wrap up with the new search that's going on, that, again, they're going to go back out basically at the same spot, just try new technology, and
I'm happy for them if they succeed. I would be happy for this thing to be over. I was a younger man when this thing started. I've got a lot more gray hairs on my head, and I'm ready to move on. I would love to have this thing be done and dusted. Nobody would be awaiting with more anticipation what the black box is going to say happened. And I've sort of been here before, in a way. With Air France 447, we waited 2 years to get the black box data on that. And when it came out, it was absolutely fascinating. Everyone who had made their guesses was wrong. And, it was a sequence of kind of surprising, again, the assumptions, we made a lot of assumptions that were wrong. And we hopefully learned from it. Hopefully that kind of thing is less likely to happen, although very similar things have happened since. But I hope they find it, but I don't think they will. And I hope that once they don't find it, people's little knob will turn a little bit more in the direction of maybe it's not there.
Yeah. Jeff, I appreciate you joining me on the podcast. This is, again, it's always fascinating to discuss it. This is one that, again, obviously we're talking about to this day, it's just the mystery that surrounds it. And there's just so many odd things that, gosh, it could be anything. So
yeah.
Thank you.
Well, thank you, John. I feel like this conversation, like many other conversations I've had, this is how it moves forward incrementally. It's a snail's pace, but that's how a little bit we'll get there. But this helps. So I thank you.
Awesome. Thanks, Jeff.
Okay. Thanks, John.